Variables form the foundation of DataTank. There are several ways to create variables. You can create them from the menu, and here they are grouped by their dimensionality. So we'll create here a 2D function. You can create them from the toolbar. This is the shortcut that both creates the variable and selects the way, the computational method, the way it's computed. You can also create them from the context menu, which is to the right of the name. Here you can select which action and even what variable to use inside that action. That creates the variable, selects the module, how it's computed, and then makes links to the variables that it depends on. You can also clone variables if you click on it and start dragging it and hold down the option key. You see the little plus there. It creates an identical variable. You can close these so they don't take up as much space. There are two other ways of adding variables. One is you can drag a file from the Finder, and when you drop it in, it creates the module and connects it directly to it. So this here allows you to view the entire movie as a bitmap variable. You can also drag a file that it does not recognize as a data file, but rather as a file connection, and this can then be used in other modules. Every variable has a name that is specified in this field. These names then show up in the selection menu here inside other variables that use them. When you change the name in that menu is modified, and the link is not broken because the connection is to the object and not to the name. Here we'll just specify some new names. We can tab between things to get into the next entry, and this is function 2. You can also reorder the variables without breaking any of the connections. If we want to drag the grid here on top of that, we click on the icon and start dragging, and we can see by the black line where it's going to be released. Let's close these and move the functions together. Now, when you drag over a variable, that is making a connection into this. So if I drop it over here and open the function, it has been added as an argument into this function. I do not want to do that, so I'm gonna move the undo here. And one way to make sure that it just is dragged not onto the variable, but between them, is to drag it to the side of it. So this is function 1. You can also drag more than one variable at a time. So first you can select more than one by clicking outside and dragging. Then click and drag one of the icons to drag it over here. You can also undo a drag. In this mesh variable, it computes values of an analytic function on a grid. The grid is specified with a variable. The function here is specified with a variable. In here, for example, I can see that the mesh 2 is also using the same function. I clearly want to use this function. So there are several ways of changing this. One is you can, in the menu here, you can pick between the functions that are available. Or, let me do an undo. You can also take function 2 and drag it onto the mesh variable. If I drop it, I make a connection to function 2, and it's selected here. It cannot select it here. Undo. There's a third way of doing it, and if there's ambiguity, this is what you need to do. You can drag it onto the menu. Then there's a blue border around the menu, and when you release it, it selects function 2. Then lastly, if I want to delete a variable or variables, I can select them. I can do a multiple selection by, if I hold down the command key, I can select mesh 2 without selecting mesh 1 as well. Now I have these two variables selected, and I want to delete them. There are two ways of deleting. You can drag those two variables into the recycling bin, and that will delete them. Let's undo this action. Select the entries again, hold down command, click in the icon on the second. And there's a shortcut where I can hold down the command key and hit delete. That way I can delete a selection by using the keyboard rather than dragging. As DataTank scripts become more complicated, you need to organize them a little bit. The primary way to do that is to use the variable group. The variable group has two parts, the top part and then the end of the group. You can include variables in multiple ways. The simplest one is to drag the end group to incorporate what is between them. You can also select variables and drag them into the group. Let's call this details. You can have groups inside of groups. So, for example, if you create another variable group, you can include this and then yet another variable group. Drag them over here and include this. So part 1 and part 2. Now when you close it, the variables are not in the way. Now the way that this affects the selector here, how variables are selected inside other computational modules, is that you can see the groups show up as submenus. You can select them from here. Now when you click again, you can see how this is now displayed for you, and you can see here this is the top group. Inside of that, because there's one triangle here, this is one level down. Here inside the two levels down, which means that is part of the part 1 is mesh 1. Part 2, you could select mesh 2 over here. Finally, some details, especially if they're not going to be used for a while, it benefits to have some comments for them. And there are two types of comments. This is the comment here, which is a single line comment, which allows you to single line of comment. You can add multiple such comments. You can also use this text block. Now the text block is not a variable, it's just a text description. So this is, you can even include figures. So let me just do a screenshot of a portion, and I can paste in figures, multiple lines, and you can drag this around. Now dragging this around is a little tricky. You see the little angles here. You have to click on one of them in order to drag it. So you can even use a formatting ruler here to set tabs and so forth for this entry. So you can put a tab here and adjust where the tab is. Now it is time for DataTank to actually compute something. You can inspect values by using the variable monitor. So the first step is, let's open the variable monitor here, and then we can drag variables from the variable list into the monitor. We can drag them one at a time, or we can select multiple entries and drag them in. Now these show the values of each of the variables. As you change them, you can see the values change in the variable monitor. You can see the computations by by the black dot that blinks. So every time you change something, the variables that need to be computed inside the variable monitor get a little black dot while DataTank is computing them. DataTank will thread the execution, so this is 5 threads being computed at the same time for this variable monitor. Now, if you change, for example, here, so what is happening is that C, the variable, is used inside this expression here. And there's another pair of variables, W and H, that have been defined inside of this grid here. They were added by using this real number button. And then one of them was changed to a slider by going in and selecting like this. That changes it into a slider. Let's undo that. The slicing line here, and this is a 2D coordinate line, also has a slider in it. And as you slide that, the only thing affected by that change is this slicing plot here. And you can see that only those two get a little black dot when you change it, because these don't change, so they don't have to be recomputed. You can also look in more detail. This gives you a quick overview of what the variable is, saying, for example, this mesh is just that size, and as you change the size here, you can see the size of the mesh change. But you can also look at the underlying numerical values by opening up this entry. You can drag through all of the values and seeing the numerical value, and also how many nans you have, if there's any plus or minus infinity that pop up, and so forth. The plot variable has more details in here. You can look at the plot now as a graph, or you can look at the underlying numerical values. When you change the plot, this is the Y slice here, you can see the Y values are changing, and if you're in the graph, the plot will change. Just change this, the plot here will change. If you hide the variable monitor, these variables are not going to be recomputed when you change things. The only thing that is being recomputed here, you can see the little black dot in front of the mesh. And the reason it's being computed is because the range of the sliders depends on the range of the mesh. So then it needs the range. Next, we'll go into drawing with DataTank. The first step to drawing is to create a drawing window. And there are 7 types of drawing windows. This, and these 2 are vector graphics, which means resolution independent. This one here, called rendered, uses OpenGL to render the image. So let's start with a 2D space. When you have a drawing window selected, the drawing menu here will show the commands you can add to that drawing window. And here we're going to add a command to draw a mesh. Inside the mesh command, we can select which mesh to draw. So this here will draw the mesh using a color ramp that we can change. Using a range that by default is 0 to 1, we can click on now to have it pick up what the range is, or we can type in the range we want. We can also add in entries by dragging them from the variable list. Now, what happens is that since these are 2 different windows, the first click here brought the window to the front, obscuring portions of it. So to hide this, we can detach this window, and we can resize it, and we can drag it to the bottom if we don't need it. When I drag the coordinate line over here, it created a command and selected this line for me. I can show here by deleting the command here and seeing if I drag this here, does the same thing. But I need to type back in this. Now, another way of drawing things is to, once you have the plot here, for example, you can click inside this context menu, and in here you can create a drawing window from within the menu. And this creates the 1D plot, in this case window, and effectively drags the plot into it. There's also a way to draw this in 3D. We'll draw here by using the rendered view. And this here, let's resize it, uses OpenGL to draw the mesh. We should still set the range here, either with the now button or by typing in, since I want the same range here and here. Now, to navigate this window, you can click and drag to rotate the view. This just rotates it. The z-axis is always going up. You can also hold down the shift key, and if you drag into the center, it reduces it, and if you drag away from the center, anywhere away from the center, it zooms in. So rotate, zoom in. You can also drag this coordinate plot here. And there's a shortcut here. If you hold down the command key, as you click in the background window, you can immediately start dragging. The window does not pop up into the front. And you can drag this variable here into this window. That creates a command here to draw a plane or coordinate line as a plane in the graphic. You can adjust any aspect of it. You can adjust, for example, the color of it. Now, let's adjust these so that they all show up at the same time. Now, when we have them and we change any aspect of it, for example, we change the C value, you can see that everything is updated immediately. You can change the slider. This changes, since every drawing window depends on it. And note the little dots that show up here in front of the drawing commands, indicating that there is something being redrawn in them. Last thing here is to show inside of these commands there is a checkboxes to show, to exclude and hide. And when you click the hide here, it hides the context here. So you can toggle, for example, to see what this is doing. You can also exclude it, and that means that the range is not going to be affected by it. The last step is to export this data. And you can export it through the clipboard, or you can export it through a file. Exporting through clipboard is just done by copying. So you select the drawing window you want, and you can select a figure, which is a PDF figure, or a TIFF figure with an alpha channel here or without an alpha channel. You can do this also in 3D. You can copy the same things here. The other way of doing it is to do an export, and you can save it as a EPS figure or a PDF figure or a TIFF. You can also show QuickTime, but we're not going to go through that in this video.